Well, good afternoon, Scott Baker.
Mikey, how are you? Wednesday. It is October 15th, 3 o'clock Eastern Time. We're live here on Lead Better to talk about how to lead better and also to talk about today's field note, which is a great topic about how good leaders develop an editorial mindset. This is field note number 1588, editorial mindset.
Now, you worked at a large website. Did your title include editor-in-chief?
A couple of different times at different, and obviously 20 years in television, I was not like the managing editor in those roles, but there was a lot of editorial going on. And then I was part of a bunch of big digital news operations, and at different points, editor-in-chief was the title. And in fact, I would say in some ways, it's not my title at Admired Leadership, but it is a lot of what I do.
Sure. Yeah. So, but what is the one role of an editor that seems to be true across like most media?
Well, the word most is part of it, which is what is most important, right? So if you're running a digital news operation and you have, the manpower to cover 15, 20, 25 stories thoroughly that day, and there's 800 possible stories, then the editor is looking through all of the different sources that are coming in. There's tips that come to your tip box. There's each beat reporter has their own sort of set of like, here's this and here's that. And then you're looking at the potential audience, and your potential audience might have its own constituencies, right? That are varied. And so you're trying to, just like a newspaper editor would, you're trying to best represent that day that best kind of meets the information needs. And how do you enhance the conversation around substantive issues? So in the end, you're going to be saying no to a lot more things than you're saying yes to. And so that is the process. Now, we think of editor sometimes in terms of literally the words and the lines on the page and going through and making sure this is grammatical and are we going to move this paragraph up here? And that certainly is to a degree part of it. But I think the largest thing, and we're all editors to a certain degree, which is it's how do we focus people's attention? Sometimes it's the audience, sometimes it's the people in our organization, sometimes it's our own minds that keep shouting at us. And so in a world like that, we're all making these decisions around certain kinds of content and we're editing. And that function is really just the elevation of what is most important.
Right. No, I find it interesting, the commentary that I hear around a younger generation who was raised online, raised in social media, that they have the tendency to be more mature than when you or I were at our age. Mature in this way, in that they are always thinking of how they come across on camera. They're always thinking
yes, very much
of how it is that they could turn this into a video. And then they're very aware that there's cameras and videos, recording equipment everywhere. So catching themselves in public is something that they're more attuned to than you or I may have been when we were kids.
Yeah, right.
And so that job of editing themselves is something that they constantly do. So they're experts in a realm that they might not even recognize that they're experts in.
I'm sure that they don't, and that's why I have my youngest child is still just moved out of elementary school into middle school. But watching over the last couple of years, you just saw that when you would go into a classroom of second grade, third grade, fourth graders, what do you want to be when you grow up? YouTuber, is the most common answer. Now, there are some good parts about that because, it was very rare back, when we were that age that you would ever see yourself on camera, except for the birthday party video, that your dad took and didn't quite know how to, edit, which was different from when I was a kid, when it was just a slideshow. Like there might've been some video, but it was, it was herky jerky and everybody looked like they were from the Civil War. Right. So, I think what we're looking at here is, they often say that a CEO is sort of a CRO, a chief reminding officer. Why are we here? What are we doing? What matters most? That which matters most should never be at the mercy of that which matters least. And that's a reminder, but there's an editor function. And I think that's what this field note is driving at, which is in a world of an infinite array of facts, then the way that we sort through those facts to say, these are the facts that we're going to bring our attention to, and this is the narrative that makes sense around those facts, that then can give a cohesive identity to the organization, to the mission of the organization, and to the values of the organization. And those things are not just like made up. It's not like a fiction that you've applied to the way of that reality is. And so when you think about that if you're having an editorial mindset as a leader, you are helping orchestrate the way that you and those on your team actually see the way that reality is laying out in front of you with the tasks that you've chosen to tackle to make the kind of change that you want to make in the world.
Right. Okay. So in the control room of, say, a production of a live NFL Monday Night Football game, there is a director and a producer in the room. Mm-hmm. There's people who are calling the shots to go back and forth. Maybe the person who's actually calling the shots on which camera to take is not necessarily the producer or the director. Is there room for an editor? Is there an editor in that room, or is that like too fast paced to be able to actually have an editor in that room?
Well, yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, which is, you know, we think of in television news terms, in fact, in local newsrooms, there's a news director. Now, right. That news director is actually the editor, the executive in charge of everybody in the news organization. That's different than the person who is the director of the news, right? Meaning who's punching the camera to go take this crowd shot or this, you know, like what was the one the other night where there was a quarterback who was injured and the coach was kind of yelling at the doctor who was on right. the side and yes. And I don't know if there were repercussions. Well, if there's 4 different camera shots and I'm the director, there's no time for me to consult with anybody to say, camera 3, focus in on that. Like, right. And then you're making, because you realize in the moment, something's happening here, right? Let's see how this is all going to play out. And then a lot of times, we all know this, we're watching any kind of a game and we all see something that's very egregious. And you're like, why didn't they replay that? Why they need to go back and fix that because that was a travesty of justice. Right. And then the game just goes on and nobody's paying attention to what you were yelling at, you know, on your couch.
So, right. Sometimes they do that for the home team so that they can like kind of lock in and allow that situation to just go away. And sometimes like with a gruesome injury.
Yes, right. No, certainly that is the case. Yeah.
But yeah, they'll cut away from things. Is the job, is there an editor in the room, like actually calling the shot on you're doing that or you're not doing it? Or is that just the director acting as editor?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, we do things that people aren't ready for or should not necessarily be exposed to while they're having lunch, right? Sure. And so there's no need to sort of fixate on gruesome injuries. Same thing in organizations. There are things that you as a leader, you know, we've talked about this, which is being an authentic leader doesn't mean that you are sharing every single piece of information that you have, right. You know, including perhaps medical information you have about colleagues. Like there's things that you're just not supposed to disclose, right? And if I'm having certain feelings about risk, about whether we're going to be able to land this loan or whether, you know, we're going to be able to, we might be on the brink of losing our number one, you know, client. Do I just go like, yeah, everybody, I think we're probably screwed today because I think tomorrow we're going to get some really, really bad. I mean, that may happen. Your job is not to just be like ready to collapse, right? And so you've got to have to, part of that role of the leader is bearing those burdens. That means knowing what not to say. Right. And I think we've all seen leaders of all kinds, political and business leaders, where we're like, could you just stop talking now? I think it'd be better if we don't hear any more about this. Right?
Yeah, the real trick there, and I think, I mean, we mentioned it with, you know, having this self-edit in your brain because of social media, but a real leader will quickly change from first person singular to first person plural as they think about the health of their organization. And so that switch that you make where you're not editing for yourself, but you're editing for your organization, like what's the best way for this meeting to go off so that we all are, you know, focused at the end of the meeting with the most important thing. That's not about self-editing. That's about getting in the minds of everybody in the room.
Well, think about this, and we all do this to some degree. We're always sharing links or things we think are interesting or help, you know, that refer to things. I made a reference we had our Admired Leadership Community Conference yesterday for 5 hours of just great discussion with a very large audience that tuned in. And I even made a mention of a joke that a comedian once told. And then afterwards, I sent to the team a video clip of that joke. It's just a joke. But as you and I were recognizing, there's actually such craft in the way that particular joke was told, right? That when we think about whatever we're presenting, rather, because we're publishing daily field notes, right, that we've been doing for 4+ years and reaching 183 countries, as we've talked about. Lots of people are looking at those. You and I are very involved in the editing process of those. We're also in the process of curating the way it's, because our AI, Alex, is not like other AIs and other large language models. It is highly trained on millions of words from admired leadership over 30 years, 35 years. And so in there, it's designed to be a proprietary AI that's focused on giving you not what is every theory of leadership out there. It's like, well, look, I need some answers. I need to know what to do to talk to my team. I need to know how to talk to the board. I need to know how to talk to my kid. Here's a scenario coming up. Here's a job interview I have, or a performance review. And you're going to get information from Alex that is very specific to the kinds of questions and conversation you're having. But that just doesn't come out of nowhere, right? That's because the way that Alan and others on the editorial side of the team have put together the information that LLM draws on is very select. Same thing that we do when we present all of our admired leader behaviors in our main platform. There's 100+ of those behaviors, and we've shot hundreds of hours of video, and a lot goes into sorting those out and making those. When we say that admired leader behavior can be told and explained in just a couple of minutes, yeah, but it also, for that 5-minute video, there's a lot of hours that go into making sure that it's as crisp and clean as it could be, and we're leaving out lots of things in that whole process. Then when you get to that level of a coach or a cohort we're running, or dialogues, you're choosing. And so think about it. By the time you're a leader with a team, you're saying, let's be aware of our processes. Let's be aware of market trends. Let's be aware of shifts in the landscape in general in the economy, things we know about clients. You're sharing news links, you're sharing insights, this conversation happening. It's, can I draw to your attention? All of this is about attention. Everything is always about what is the world that we're filtering out to the world that we're filtering on. And the clarity of that is an act of leadership at the highest level. Yeah.
And difficult too, right? Because you're also, as leaders, the chief culture officer as well. So you're trying to build a certain thing and edit it at the same time, right?
Yes.
So and it's a complicated role.
Yeah, well, yes, you are. And that process of even knowing what product to build is an important question too. But we see it. I mean, you and I do it in our team at different points every day, where we're like, well, this is the thing that actually matters. And then we see it in the leaders in our organization where there was a small incident, not an incident, but there was an issue in the last week or two. And our founding partner said, I would have changed this word because it means a different thing than what we have meant it to mean for 30 years. And this is why we need to think about it this way. And when this is done in this kind of a meeting, this is the kind of content that's going to work best in that meeting. And this is the kind of content we don't want to get to in that kind of meeting. And everybody goes, oh, well, we hadn't really been thinking about that, right? Well, that's the process of a great leader, highlighting a particular point, edit this in, edit this out, and then everybody gets better as they hear all of the gradations of this, and it all feeds into a very rich and hopefully then a substantial organization.
Right. Okay, so great metaphor. Most of the time we have a tendency to want to stay away from this principle-based kind of leadership metaphors, right? Servant leadership is a similar kind of thing. But the reason that we step away from those metaphors oftentimes is because they're not universal. They don't work in all situations.
Well, and what we've always said is that admired leader behaviors and the things we talk about in our field notes up all the way through our coaching and our platforms, if you are a big believer in servant leadership, admired leadership will make you better at that, right? Whatever the approach you're taking, it's agnostic to the framework and the worldview, right? But within the worldview that we're in, which is behavior, drives attitudes and mindset, right?
Right.
Rather than being like, well, let me just wait until I figure it all out, and then I'll someday get started once I feel like a leader.
Right.
Just start doing this. Now, you as a leader are then saying to your team, let's take a look at this. Let's do this. You're selecting actions. You're like a coach. You're selecting plays, right? You're reading the environment. And so it's just not a bad idea to have that idea that you're putting the hat on, you're the editor, and that you're going to be the one that's helping to filter the world in a way that makes everybody feel clear. There's a lot of clarity. There's a lot of alignment. There's feedback that comes in that. And it is an act of leadership. And editor-in-chief is not a bad way to think about it.
Right. Behavior number one then is get used to saying no, right? Is that, I mean, it seems super simple,
right, yeah.
Maybe that's true for a lot of people.
Interesting, not on our agenda today.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Thanks for this conversation. We'll talk again tomorrow. Bye now.